time for the mixed media segment of my Project 52. For this segment, I have been working in a variety of different mediums. I've been using my fibre-based prints and then things like watercolors, fine liners, so we'll go into it as we go through the video. But I will say that up front I made a bit of a mistake. So I had originally chosen different prints for each week that I wanted to print, thinking that I had a full box of cotton rag paper from Ilford in the cupboard, but it turned out that I just hadn't looked properly, and what I actually had was an almost empty box of cotton rag paper and then a full box of resin coated paper in the same size. I just hadn't looked at the labels properly, so yeah, my mistake. One thing I will mention that I didn't mention, I don't think, in Vlogmas when I was also working with the cotton rag paper, is that fibre-based paper, once you've made the prints, it takes a lot longer to dry than resin coated paper does. And as it's drying, the print will tend to darken, which it doesn't with resin coated. This is not usually a problem for me because I quite like that subtle extra contrast that comes in a print. But in this case, I had purposefully wanted to underexpose my images because I wanted the two mediums to work together. I didn't want the initial print to be too dark. So that is one mistake that's consistent throughout this video, is that I find the underlying print with too rich a blacks, there's too much going on, and it would be better if they were a bit less exposed. So just bear that in mind as we go through. Let's get out my painting. So week one, I wanted to work with gouache. In a normal painting, on normal paper, you know, not a print, I love gouache. It has such a smooth way of going onto the paper. It's really lovely to work with. It's like a blend between acrylics and watercolour, so you can thin it down and use it more like watercolours, or you can have it nice and thick like an acrylic. So it's a really lovely medium to work with ordinarily. Each time I've used it, you know, back when I was doing my little experiments in one of my Darkroom vlogs, it just never comes out the way that you want it to. Despite me putting multiple layers on and trying to build up the coverage, it still just felt very patchy. It didn't have quite the opacity that I wanted it to. I was going for pastel-y colours, I was going for organic shapes, you know, quite Pinterest friendly. I did also actually have a little experimentation on a second print in which I was trying to do some leaves going round a picture of a plant. But what I noticed actually was that there was quite a lot of bleeding going on of the paint. It was spreading out from the edges. They weren't giving the nice crisp edges that I would expect from this medium. Moving on to the next week, and this was my fine liner week, and this one is one of those weeks where the fact that I overexposed the images, I mean, I didn't overexpose them, but I didn't underexpose. That is a problem for this week because the fine liner therefore did not show up in the way that I wanted it to. What I wanted was to do different patterns on different petals. I wanted you to be able to tell that it was a flower, but that I wanted it to have that extra dimension of the fine liner, the extra definition around the edges of the petals, but ultimately it's very hard to see what I was trying to do in this print. So again, I went into my little box of treasures, my box of waste prints, and I got out one of my more underexposed ones from Vlogmas, and I chose this one because I wanted to work with all the squares and the triangles and the straight lines in the print. And I actually really love how this one came out. It came out just as I had wanted essentially the flower one to come out. It looks like, I don't know, what's the word, like hyper reality or something. Like there's something not quite right about it, but it also looks relatively normal, like there's something going on. So yeah, I love that one. Week 3, I was using the Posca pens again. I don't know whether I just used Posca pens wrong. It's not something I'm very used to using. I really didn't like the way they came out on the print. It was very enjoyable to do. I would liken it to a painting by numbers or some sort of like colouring in page, but I wouldn't call this art. Like, it's a very expensive way to do colouring in, essentially. So not a method that I'm going to continue with or continue experimenting with. So unfortunately, you know, we've had not too great a start to this segment. However, it's going to pick up from here, week 4. And I started working with watercolours. It's so funny, isn't it? Because in the very first experiments that I was doing in my Darkroom blog, I really didn't like watercolour. And then the more I've worked with it, the more, I don't know, the brillianter I found it. It is much easier to work with than, say, the gouache. It covers quite nicely when you want it to, but equally it can give a nice rich colour, but with that element of being able to see through it to the print underneath. I didn't want to do it like colouring in like I have in a couple of the other segments. I wanted it to be like an image over the top, a bit like I did with the mandalas. And so this time I went for circles. I used one of my little film canisters to make the circles, and then opted for a bold red that I thought worked really well with the image. You know, yes, okay, it's not 100% neat at the edges. That's more about my painting technique than anything else. But it's something where I can see so much more versatility than I could at the beginning. So that is a method and a medium that I do really want to work with in the future. I could see myself, like, this is the first time in this segment where I've created something that I could imagine framing and putting up on my wall. Okay, we come to inks. Now, I have mixed emotions about the final product for this week, and essentially I don't like what I've created, but I love the medium. I think the mistake that I made was that I started using the yellow and I loved it, and then I decided to try and add in some other pops of colour. So we've got the sort of pinky red and then the green of the leaves behind. I really wish I hadn't done that, because I think if I'd just done it in the yellow, I would have really liked this picture. I also wanted to black out the back. So on the other ones, you can see where the edge of the print is compared to the paper. On this one, I kind of wanted to blend the edge of the print into like the border of the paper. The yellows and the other colours have an opacity, a bit like watercolour, where you can see the shades of grey popping through. With the black, that is like total blackness. It comes through so dark, and so we've ended up with something that's a lot sort of harsher than I had anticipated. Certainly in my experiments before, I really liked the inks. It's just making sure that your vision for how the print is going to turn out comes out as you hope it will. So yeah, certainly one I'm going to be working with again. And then for the sort of extra week that I hadn't really anticipated when I was doing the printing was embroidery onto the print. And so what I ended up having to do, because I'd already made the prints when I decided to do this, was I used the test print. So it is a lot darker than the others. And then I just chose some complementary colours, trying to use my knowledge from segment 2 with the colour theory. I didn't want to do the whole image with embroidery. I just wanted to pick out sections, and it sort of came on as I was making it. I didn't know whether they were going to be randomly dotted around the print, but what I found as I was working was that I quite liked it all being to one side, and I also liked, again, coming off the edge of the print. This is another one where until you actually have a go at it, you don't really know how it's going to come out. So I had visions of quite tightly packed thread to make it really feel, I don't know, like a leaf. Whereas in reality, when you've been doing the holes, you realise that you can't do that because your holes would need to be too close together and then there would be no paper for the thread to hold on to. So you end up with this much more liney effect. And actually, I really like it. I'm really happy with how this came out. So again, it's another method that I can see myself working with in the future and trying again. So a mixed bag this time, but I really enjoyed it. Next segment, I'm doing some work where I'm looking through some of my old my archive images. Obviously that's what the project 52 is about. I'm looking through the archive and trying to find images that I feel represent a book that I've read in some way. And then I'm creating either a poster or a new dust jacket / book cover for the book. So yeah, I've started work, as I'm filming this week, I've started work on my first dust jacket and learning how to measure that up and get the dimensions and a random one to slot in, but it's my project 52 and I can Do it as I please. So yeah, so that's the next one. Hope you've enjoyed this one. Have you tried any of these techniques? I'd really love to hear from you. And also if you've tried one that I haven't that you think I'd enjoy, I'd really love to know. Thank you.